Now, can we shift to when you first experienced discrimination?
Well, as I told you once before, my mother was born in Mexico, came here as a little girl with my grandfather, and my grandfather, when one of his trips back to Mexico, he disappeared. It was during the Mexican Revolution. It was around the 20s, and my mother had been raised by this family in Martinez town. When my grandfather was out working, they were a family that he had met. My grandfather was a miner. He worked in the coal mines and the copper mines and various mines around New Mexico. And then, of course, her first husband passed away. My father's first wife passed away, and they were both widowers. My dad had 7 children from his first wife. My mom had 3 from her first marriage, and they started out with 10. And I'm the oldest of the new marriage. I had an older sister that passed away, died as a baby, died in childbirth, and then I was the second child. But anyway, when I was growing up, my mother was very anxious to look for her mother. She was trying to find my grandmother. And at that time, many people who were Mexican nationals working in the railroad lived in around the St. Francis area. They call it, in those days people referred to it as Chihuahuita, because everybody there was from Mexico. They worked on the railroad, and there was a very small population compared to today. Of course, the city was very small. We only had a population of about 50,000 total in Albuquerque. It was much smaller than today. So my mother and I, on a regular basis, we'd walk over to St. Charles, which was a good 3-mile walk from our house, 3 or 4 mile walk, to go to mass there and meet some of mother's friends and see if there was anybody who was from the area where my mother had come from as a little girl. So try to get information. A formal system of information, which still exists today only because now you have the cell phones, it works better, but people depended on rumors and all sorts of things. And so my mother and one of these, whenever we'd go over there, they also would celebrate at that mass some of the Mexican holidays. 16th of September, for example. Nobody in New Mexico celebrated 16th of September but Mexican nationals. And nobody ever knew. If you ask anybody what the 16th of September was, they couldn't have told you in New Mexico 40 years ago. I mean, the average Hispanic New Mexican. I bet you that's true today too, but it was more so then. And I remember one time we were at a procession, maybe with Our Lady of Guadalupe, I can't remember, but we're doing a procession around the church. I was walking with my mother, and all these people were watching. Like, people were dressed up in their Mexican dresses and china poblanas and all that, and walking around, and all these other New Mexico Chicanos would start hollering at us, "Surumatos, váyanse para atrás para México, Surumatos." The word I don't know where that word came from, but there's a place called Soruma, but I don't know if it has anything to do with, and I never checked out where that word came from. I was thinking about that the other day. I was thinking maybe what they meant, sur, and you're from the southern, so maybe that's what they were referring to. But no, I've never met anybody who knows what the word means, but those were fighting words. That's like calling somebody, I don't know, today a mojado or something like that, And, but that's the kind of thing. My mother, I overheard my aunts make remarks about my mother. And she came here when she was 7 years old, for God's sake. She wasn't exactly, she didn't exactly just cross the river, But that, and it's still going on today. It's still going on today, The little fights between kids whose families are from Mexico and the local kids. They call them cuaritos in Albuquerque High. That's been going on for some time now.
And so when you were a boy, did you get that
Oh yeah, because I would, you know.
personally?
Sure, but because I would always, I made the mistake of correcting people's Spanish sometimes, because my mother wouldn't let us speak Spanish the way it was spoken here, like, you know, people here say, leva for sobre todo, or, calcetines for, we say medias in New Mexico, calcetines in Mexico. My mother always insisted that we use, that we use the Spanish that she knew, because she thought that was the correct Spanish. Or say, you know, the New Mexicans at that time pronounced the H, or oso, instead of saying oso for bear, they say joso, or hoyo, they say hoyo in New Mexico, Spanish. You know, if in Northern New Mexico, they had their way. And my mother just thought that was terrible Spanish. So I would, so the other, when I made a remark like that, I would, you know, vete pa Mexico, you know, go back to Mexico if you want. So there was always that little, and you know, New Mexicans don't like to be called Mexicans.
So how did you feel when you were a kid and this encounter would happen? What did you make of that as a child?
I don't know that it hurt me. I mean, I was going after we found my grandmother when I was about 12, and we started visiting my grandmother, I really liked Mexico, you know, so I would say I'm a Mexicano. It didn't bother me at all. But because I had a connection, you know, it wasn't like if you don't have a connection. Yeah. And you know, I think kids, the saying, you know, there's a saying that if you don't know your history, if you know, you got to know where you're from before you know where you're going.